Statement of work. A statement of work is a formal document that captures and defines the work activities, deliverables, and timeline a vendor will execute against in performance of specified work for a client. The SOW typically forms of a purchase order or a contract. Therefore, if the project is being performed under contract for an external client, the work to be performed is likely to be defined in a SOW issued by the client. A project SOW may also be developed by an internal client to concisely define the project's deliverables based on inputs from business case, strategic plan, and other documents including the project charter. Contract documents defining the project scope of work. There are a number of interrelated documents that describe the overall scope of work in a project, whilst the use of these terms varies by application area. The general intent of documents should be consistent. Project scope. An overall statement of the work needed to be accomplished to achieve the goals and objectives of the project, including the delivery of the product, service, or result. Other required deliverables, constraints, and other relevant items. The project scope statement is a narrative description of these requirements, including the major deliverables, assumptions, constraints, and description of the work to provide a basis for understanding the work and reaching agreement with stakeholders. Product scope describes the features and functions that characterize the product, service, or result that will be transitioned to the project customer or end user. It is a subset of the overall project scope. Specification. A document that defines in complete, precise, and verifiable manner the technical attributes of the product, service, or result to be created and how they will be achieved and tested or measured. There are usually a bundle of specifications, each for designated part of or component used in the overall project, such as design specification, manufacturing specification, concrete specification, and test specification. Statement of work. A concise description of a deliverable to be supplied, usually included in a contract or purchase order. Contracts. A legally binding agreement between the buyer and the seller, usually only used for external clients. The contract takes precedence over all the other documents and will define what other documents are binding on the parties. And in the event of discrepancy within the documents, which one takes a precedence. A contract will usually contain or reference project SOW, which in turn will detail applicable scope statement and supporting specification. Elements of typical statement of work. Areas that are typically addressed by a SOW are also follows. Purpose. Why are we doing this project? The objectives the contract subcontract is expected to achieve. Scope of work. This describes the work to be done in appropriate detail. Location. This describes where the work is to be performed, where the deliverables are to be installed or handed over to the client. Period of performance. This specifies the allowable time for the work, such as start and finish time, number of hours that can be billed per week or month, where work is performed, and anything else that relates to scheduling. Deliverable schedule. This lists the specific deliverables describing what is due and when. Applicable standards. This describes and standards that need to be adhered to in fulfilling the contract, including technical, quality, safety, and environmental performance standards. Performance criteria. Applicable service level agreements, warranties, etc. used by reference to annex or public documents. Acceptance criteria. This specifies how the buyer or receiver of goods will determine if the product or service is acceptable. What objective criteria will be used to state the work is acceptable. Special requirements. This specifies any special requirements such as degrees or certification for personnel, travel requirements, and anything else not covered in the contract specifics. Type of contract or payment schedule. The payment breakdown, whether upfront or phased and reference to the overarching contract. Miscellaneous. There are usually a few other elements that need to be added or reference. Defining the scope of work included in the SOW. The definition of the scope of work to be included in the SOW or any other scoping document should comprise two elements: a description of the product, service, or result to be created, and the boundaries of the work, what is in and what is out of scope. The deliverables. The three key elements of deliverable are description of what it is at an appropriate level of detail, how you will know the deliverable has been delivered, easy for tangible deliverables but more difficult for intangible items such as culture change, and the quality to be achieved and how these elements will be tested and accepted. The specific details are usually defined in the detailed scope statement and specification reference from the overall SOW. Project boundaries. Boundary statements are used to define what is within the boundaries of the SOW and are therefore to be delivered by the supplier or project, and what is outside those boundaries. The more accurately you can define these boundaries, the better of the project will be. The nature of true boundary statement that there is both an in-scope element and relevant out-of-scope counterpart that between them define the limits of the work. Example of project boundaries. Defining which major life cycle processes that are in scope or out of scope. For example, are the requirements clearly defined, or is there some work required to refine the requirements? Who is responsible developing the support system, and who will provide ongoing support of the end user and for how long? Next, defining which of the support functions are in scope or out of scope. For instance, how much of the training is in scope and how much will be done as part of an organizational change management process. Developing the training documentation, training the trainers, training the end users, etc. All of this work could be in scope of the SOW may simply require some assistance to help the organization's training department do the work. Defining which parts of the organization are in scope or out of scope. In some cases, defining the departments involved in the project help to define the boundaries. For instance, the project may be applicable to human resource and accounting departments, but the manufacturing division might be out of scope. Or perhaps, your project is only impacting the corporate office while the field offices are out of scope. And last, defining what functionality is in scope or out of scope. For instance, financial reporting may be in scope but human resources reporting is out of scope. Generally, the most important aspect of this process is writing the out of scope statement. Statements such as this SOW does not include training focuses everyone's mind on making sure these important functions are covered up elsewhere. This is the sample of statement of work. And that's all. Thank you.